Hey folks, Brad Scott from Canadian Cowboy Outdoors here. Hey listen, today we're going to take you on a trip. We're going to be going out and catching some high pressure bass. That's right, I've taken all the worst conditions that you can imagine. We got the end of a long weekend, cold front, rain, waves, it's midday, and it is only about 60 degrees out right now. These largemouth bass have shut down, they've gone down, but we're going to go out there and we're going to catch them. When I grew up, I watched a lot of in-fisherman specials, and one thing that I learned from Al Linder and the gang, and that was the fish are always biting. So we're going to put that theory to the test today as we get out there and try to catch ourselves some high pressure largemouth bass under the worst conditions possible. Stay tuned and let's go get some. Well, welcome back folks to Canadian Cowboy Outdoors. We're out here, like I promised you, some of the worst weather conditions and fishing conditions you can find for largemouth bass. Now we're going to start off today. I'll show you a few of the baits that I'm going to plan on using. We're going to be using some crankbaits to start off with. That's right, some fast-moving, deep-running crankbaits. And I'll show you a little bit later on the sonar there, the areas that we're fishing and hoping to catch these fish in. But first of all, we're going to be using the Jabberjaw Deep 13 fishing. We're going to use it on a blackback shad, possibly going to go to a crawfish color such as that. We're going to start off with a blackback shad. What I want to do today, folks, is start fishing deep water. I'm going to find these bass in the deepest water that's adjacent to their normal holding areas. If I'm assuming that these fish are moving out of their normal shallow spots because of the low pressure, because of the high pressure fishing, then I'm also going to bet that they're going to be setting up, sitting on the bottom in some of the deepest spots. We got ourselves a Rapala DT14. We're going to go again with natural colors today. We're not going to go too crazy with chartreuses and bright colors. We're going to start with natural colors. So those are my selections there, right there, to start off with. And once we get it in the water, we'll show you exactly where we're throwing these baits. Well, we're set up on our spot right now. We're going to start off with those crankbaits. A lot of times people ask me, if you're fishing high pressure bass, shouldn't we be using finesse techniques? Well, that is the truth under some circumstances. When you're back there still in the shallow waters over there fishing on the docks, when those fish are high pressured and they're still sitting in those spots, you're going to want to use a finesse presentation. They're going to be in a negative mood and you're going to have to finesse a bite out of them. But those aren't the fish that we're after. We're still fishing the same conditions. We've got low light, we got an east wind, we got waves, rain, we got high pressure from all the fishing happened on the long weekend. But we're going to fish with the bass that were under those docks, the ones that were under the water. They've moved to deeper water, pockets and weed lines that are out here, and we're going to try to dredge them up. And they're still going to be active. They're the same fish that were back there, but they're going to be out here active. We're going to start with some crankbaits. So stay tuned and let's get some on. You might notice I do have a leader on. I do use a leader. This Jabberjaw being a bit of a smaller bait. There are pike in the area. And when there's pike in the area, well yeah, I'll get bit off. I know, keep bragging on Jabberjaw and how they're an affordable bait, but not sort of affordable that I can afford to give one up every trip. So I will recommend putting on a leader if you use a smaller bait. Now later on, when I get in the deep water, oh, there's a fish right there. See, I'm just coming in, my cast is right to the edge of that deep water. It's a little pike. All right, well, there. And that's how we like to unhook pike. It's also why we're using a leader. Right. Fish number one. It's just as I'm coming into this deep water, and that's where I just found a fish. There will be big pike in the same zone as these bass, because bait fish that are out here are big, and that's where the big predators are going to congregate. Like I said, I like to use natural colors. It's one of the modifications I do, you know, consciously choose for these fish that are in bad weather conditions, even though they're still using the fast moving bait. I do like the natural colors. I think that even if the fish has a little bit of a negative attitude, that sometimes the bright colors might make the difference for them to choose not to hit that bait. So I will come forth with a more natural, a bluegill pattern, shad pattern, and find that I'll get a few more hits on those baits when I'm talking bad weather conditions, bad fishing conditions. Just right on the edge. Right now you can see right on the edge of that pothole. I'm coming into it. Oh, there's a fish right there. Bring it up, and what do we got now? Another northern pike. All right, well, we seem to find pike. Well, little fella. All right, well, the edge is where you want to be. Now we just got to turn the tides and get these bycatch pike out of my way into some largemouth bass. They'll be here. See you later, little guy. One of the options I have right now while sitting on that line, while I'm casting a 7 to 8 foot deep crankbait, is I can fish just inside that line. I can fish just inside those weeds without getting terribly hung up. So I just might take advantage where my boat's sitting. And there's another fish right there. Oh, this one's a runner. Nice bass. There we go, folks. That's exactly what I'm talking about. I'm gonna get the inside edge, and while I'm at it, stay a little shallow for my first run through. Well, there you go, folks. Largemouth bass on the crankbait in terrible, terrible weather conditions. All right, unhooked himself. Lovely. Kiss him goodbye. Thank you, folks, for joining me fish. All right. See if there's another one out here. Like I said, folks, you can catch fish in the worst conditions if you know where to look. You notice I will set the hook, if you want to call it that, when I rip that bait off of those weeds. So I want those weeds to be free. I don't want those weeds to stay on the lure. A little bit of coontail on there now, but I want those weeds to free itself from the lure, and that bait to present itself to those bass that are watching it going, what the hell is that minnow's problem? And then, oh, I guess it's stupid, I will eat it. That's what I want to happen under the water. Cormorants are always a good sign. Loons are a good sign. Anytime you see these fish-eating birds that are cruising the same areas that you're fishing, I mean, you ask any, there's a fish right under the boat. What do we got? Anytime you see birds in that area, you know there's going to be fish in that area. So, well, that fish happens to be a pike today again. Pike number 5 of the day. I'm going to get my pliers before I get anything else. Alright, this is a pike. I do that more often. What I would like to do is just unhook you and let you go. That's all I want. Just like that. Bye. There's some good weeds. Like I mentioned before, folks, the only time that I don't generally do a, retrieve and pause technique in order to trigger a strike is when I am fishing a real deep crankbait and I'm intentionally ripping through weeds or intentionally bouncing off the bottom. Right now I got a 14 to 16 foot deep crankbait, and I don't want to pause it for it to float back up out of those weeds. I want to keep it cranking and keep it going down into that weed edge and then ripping it out. And when I rip it out of those weeds, when it gets caught, that's the triggering effect, as opposed to the pause that we do when we're in maybe a bit shallower water, or if we're fishing a more in the middle of the water column. So I'll take this bait, and it's 13 feet here, but we can see there's weeds that are growing up about 10, and I got a DT14 on. And again, I like to throw a bait that dives 2 to 3 feet deeper than what the water is, and what the bait bottom of the lake is. And if I am ripping through weeds like this, then I'm going to keep ripping through weeds. I'm not going to pause, because as I rip through the weeds, when I do pull back and rip through, when I catch up to that lure with my reel, there is a pause naturally in that bait's motion. So remember that. Don't pause intentionally, when you're trying to bounce it off bottom, that's the triggering when it hits bottom, or ripping through the weeds. That ripping action is also going to be your triggering effect. If the crankbait isn't deep enough to be ripping off weeds, or deep enough to be bouncing off bottom, then I will still use the retrieve and pause technique. See how the weeds actually dissipate, how there's less weeds on top of here. It's because it's a rocky bottom. It comes off this rocky shoreline here. I want to find those weeds to begin. So it'll be naked at 8 feet, then there will be weeds, and then it'll drop to 17. So there's going to be actually a weed hump right here. And I want to try to fish that weed hump. You can see it coming on my graph there. You see there's actually a weed hump. So there's an inside weed edge and an outside weed edge. And maybe we catch fish on both sides of that thing. Really neat type of structure here. So I'm going to be trying to fish this inside weed edge, where it's about 8 feet of water, where the weeds end as it goes shallower. Tried for a little bit on the deep side, where the weeds end, where it goes deeper. And then there's a fish right on the pause, just like that. Let's see what we got here. Nice largemouth bass. Let's get that bugger in the boat. Woo! That's what I'm talking about, folks. Right on the inside edge. Oh, thank you. That's the pro release right there, where they actually land in the boat. Okay, let this one settle down. There we go. Nice. Actual. Broke the hook off. Okay, we're gonna have a look at that one in a minute. All right, folks, another nice deep water bass and crankbaits for bad weather. You can see the windsurfers are out. I tell you, you don't have to go finesse to catch some of the best bass in the water. Goodbye. See ya. Now let's see what happened with this split ring. Actually came off the bottom of the bait. All right, we'll fix that and be back in business. All right, back at it after putting that treble hook back on and get that split ring issue figured out. Anyways, what happens when you catch fish, your equipment will wear out. So it's always best after a few fish or after a day on the water to check all your baits and lines and your tackle, your terminal tackle, split rings. Make sure everything's in good shape for the next run. Well, where I was before when I caught that nice one, I was fishing this inside weed edge. There's a weed edge that runs right alongside this island, but then it comes out here to the point where the deep side, there's a weed edge at 12, 13 feet. On the shallow side, because the rocky shoal, there's an actual weed edge at about 8 to 9 feet. I'm going to watch on my graph here. You see as I'm coming across 8 to 9 feet, I'm rocky bottom. See how hard that bottom is with that deep red. As it drops off, actually hits soft bottom, and there will be there an inside weed edge. Look at those weeds growing at 11, 12 feet. You see that? Pretty neat, huh? Those are the weeds that I'm going to be trying to catch the fish in. That hump of weeds comes off at 10 feet down to 13. I fished the bottom of that. It seems there might even be a fish right on the bottom of that and right through it. And of course on the inside edge too is a really sweet spot as well. The rods I'm using today, for the most part, Abu Garcia Veritas. This is a 7'6" medium heavy with a moderate action. It's got a long rod with moderate bend to it. Nice, easy bend to it. I'm using 12-pound monofilament line on there. So was it fluorocarbon? No, monofilament line. I want this line to stretch. I want to have lots of stretch in my rod and in my line when I hook bass, when I'm crankbaiting. A lot of times, a lot of lost fish are due to those hooks pulling out of those fish because we're using too heavy a line, too heavy a rod, and those treble hooks just getting in to the skin of the fish when we set the hook, and we're going to lose a lot more fish because when we fight them back to the boat on heavy equipment, that extra tension is going to cause those hooks to rip out. So use a longer rod, moderate action, and a lot lighter line, and you're going to land a lot more fish. And your lure is going to dive proper to its depth too when you're using 12 and 10-pound monofilament line as opposed to using 17 fluorocarbon. There's a fish right there. So we got, it does feel like a pike again. We'll see. Nope, nice largemouth bass. We're being not so optimistic. That is what we're after. There we go. Nice crankbait off the edge. This pothole right here. There he is. All right, kiss that little bugger goodbye. Bye. Deep crankbait again. You see this fish, how light it is, right? This fish doesn't live out here in the thick weeds. This fish has been spending his time up on that shoreline over there. He lives under that dock. He lives in those reeds during most part of the day. Today, he's moved. Today he's gone down deep. He's gone down in the thick weeds. And that's why we caught him on nice DT14 crankbait. Bye. See you never. I'm gonna keep fishing these potholes. I'm gonna keep fishing deep crankbaits, bouncing them on the bottom, hitting these fish that are sitting belly up. Not quite belly up. How about belly down? In these deep holes. You want to always set the hook, even when you get weeds on. You don't know, there could also be a fish in the end there as well. It's pulled you into those weeds. A lot of times I've ripped out of a weed, hooked a fish, and wait back into the weeds again. I just thought it was a, you know, I went from the frying pan into the fire there, but there's actually a fish on the end of it. By golly, I wish I'd set the hook on it at that time. Otherwise I ended up with a lot of weeds and not a lot of fish, but I just set the hook that time, and of course there's the bass into the boat. Another beauty on the deep crankbait on this deep weed line right there. All right. Why do you want to be so, I'm gonna put you back, huh? There you go, buddy boy. Nice to see ya. Ow! That, my friends, is what we're talking about. Set the hook when you rip the weeds, and there'll be a bass there. say nanny can. Yeah. There you go. Hi. Nice. And we're back in business, folks. Let's put the bad boy back in the water. Nice. Bye. Significant. Kind of makes me wish I had a net, but with this one, there you go, another on the crankbait in bad weather, just like that. Pictures. Alright, well, take a chance. Whoop. Nice. Great bait. Deep water. We're still fishing in pothole right here. 13 feet. We got ourselves another nice bass. Well, folks, I'd like to thank you for joining me today on Canadian Cowboy Outdoors. It's another successful day in the water, even though we've had the worst bass fishing conditions available. All right, so don't forget, folks, don't just watch someone else catch fish. Learn how and do it yourself. Kiss this one goodbye. Bye.